Uniforms folded, flag hangs on the wall. Traded steel and thunder for silence in the hall. The mission's over, the deployment's done, they said. But the war inside my head, it hasn't left its stead. Disappeared. The invisible wounds are the ones that I truly feared. I'm walking on a wire, the pressure's coming down. Is there anyone listening in this lonely town? Full speed ahead after battle.
Welcome to Full Speed Ahead After Battle, the show that refuses to look away. Every single day, 22 veterans die by suicide, and add in your first responders and civilians fighting silent battles, and that number climbs to 30 lives lost every day. That means statistically that one person will die by suicide during this very hour of this show. That's why this show exists, to break that stigma and to say out loud, it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to reach out. It's okay to care about your mental health. Now on to future veteran events. For those looking for camaraderie and some serious veteran stories, February 4th at 6 p.m., join us at VFW Post 10374 in Fort Worth for a once-in-a-lifetime spaghetti dinner with Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Doc Ballard. A Navy corpsman embedded with the Marines in Vietnam jumped on a live grenade to save his brothers. And when it didn't detonate, he threw it back and kept saving lives like every good corpsman does. Doc will be sharing his stories and signing autographs along his great friend's side, Donna Snow, star of Texas Flip and Move on the DIY network. Donna will be autographing her new book inspired by Doc himself. And then mark your calendars for April 18th. The Battle Buddy Throwdown Cornhole Tournament, raising awareness for veteran suicide and mental health. All proceeds go to our local Irreverent Warriors chapter, and we're honored to welcome Bruce Stacy as keynote speaker, a two-time Purple Heart recipient, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, and current chairman of the Air Power Council, supporting wounded warriors, children of the fallen, and veteran education initiatives. So what's been going on this past week since our last show? Well, we've had 3 VA appointments for the CMP exams, and I've got to say they were surprisingly positive, very professional and courteous, and one of the doctors was actually a veteran's wife, told me, I'm here to help you, not the VA, and that hit me differently, because first time I've ever heard that at the VA. Mom was here. She needed for much needed R&R. Took her to the rodeo for her stock show with her and my wife, and just catching up, laughing, soaking in the good stuff, you know. Last week, Grams was guest hosted here as we tackled addiction and recovery, raw, real, and necessary. And now let's get on to tonight's guest, Doug Belkofer. Doug is the founder of Forging Truth, a U.S. Army veteran, author, and trauma-informed transportation guide. He helps high-functioning men in midlife who feel stuck, numb, or disconnected under the childhood-rooted beliefs silently shaping the reality. He doesn't speak from theory, he speaks from scars. Rebuilding his marriage or rewiring trauma-shaped beliefs, he's lived it, and tonight he's here to talk about why smart, capable men feel emotionally distant, and how childhood beliefs sabotage adulthood, and what emotional armor really costs, and what it takes to finally break the cycle. If you've ever felt like you're doing the work but still stuck in the same patterns, Doug's got clarity that cuts through the fog. So buckle up, because this isn't just another episode. This is full speed ahead, and we're going straight into the fire.
The interview of the week is brought to you by Jersey Mike's, a sub above.
Doug, welcome to Full Speed Ahead. I'm glad to have you. Thanks for joining us here on a Monday night. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for that amazing introduction.
Oh, I appreciate it. I got to show off, all the guests because, I think there was some concern about how you're able to help veterans with all you're doing. And I think we talked about that. And I think it's good to point out that, a little bit about what you talk about is actually rooted in our youth. And I know we're going to get into that a bit. And, but first, I know I gave you an intro, but I'd like to take you a couple minutes and kind of introduce yourself more personally or whatever it is that I missed out there for you.
Well, you touched on one thing that I really want to emphasize, and that is a lot of us feel stuck and we don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And, we think that eventually, sooner or later, you start to think, is there something wrong with me? Because I'm the common denominator. I'm involved in all of these circumstances that seem to keep repeating the patterns.
Right.
And, while you are the common denominator, and I certainly was the common denominator, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It simply means that, as you said, your perceptions are being shaped by beliefs that go all the way back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's get into that a little bit. When we start talking about shapes and beliefs back from childhood, I'm thinking from a veteran perspective is, they say that there's two kinds of veterans, and that's ones that know that they're going to join the military growing up as a kid. And then there's one that they join because it's a last ditch effort, whether it's to stay out of prison, they didn't do so hot in school, etc. For me, I think growing up, it was because I knew I was going to be a veteran. My dad was in either the Army or the State Guard for nearly 36 years growing up. My mom was in the Army. My granddad was in the Navy. And so all those military traditions and characteristics and work hard and the suck it up and those type things stick with you. And that's one thing, I just mentioned is growing up in my era, I guess a lot of us are told to suck it up and deal with it. And that's what a lot of our veterans are told in service is suck it up and deal with it. And so I'm imagining what you're saying rooted in youth is those things like that, suck it up, you carry that forward, and that's what tears us down as adults coming out of service or anything. I'm not going to tell my wife because I just need to suck it up and deal with it. I'm not going to tell my doctor because I need to suck it up and deal with it. So is that what you're talking about, going back rooted in youth and
Absolutely.
Things?
Absolutely, but I think it goes deeper than that. Society trains men that, boys don't cry. Men need to be the provider. They need to make sure that they never show that they can't do it. There's all of these expectations that we are set for us that are always in the back of our minds. And I think that's what contributes a lot to, well, no, I'm not going to tell my doctor about that, or I'm not going to tell my wife about that. I don't want my wife to worry and think that we're going to have a big problem. I'll figure it out. It's something that I believe works against us a lot more than it works for us.
Right. So when you start talking about, being rooted in beliefs that they never chose, let's talk about that a little bit, because when you just said be a man, don't cry. That I think is
Yeah.
nowadays, I want to say, is what they consider toxic masculinity. Back then, that was just being a guy. That's what we grew up with. But so what are you talking about or referring to when those things that they didn't choose, those things that are ingrained with them, with their parents that they just don't know, the schools. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. A lot of it has to do with the fact that as a child, you don't have an ability to process something that happens to you logically. That part of your brain's not online yet. Doesn't come online until you're in your early 20s, in fact.
Mhm.
And so I'll just give you an example from my childhood. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my dad coached a little league baseball team, and I had two older brothers, and
Mhm.
they got to play on the team. And I could not wait to have my chance to play. I went to every game, and even though I was always there, it wasn't enough. I wanted to play so desperately on the team. Well, when the year came that I was finally old enough to be able to play, the whole league fell apart.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I actually asked about, hey, what's going on? Isn't it time for Little League again? And that I was told that the league fell apart. It was something about they didn't have enough teams, or they didn't have enough umpires, or whatever it was. It was out of my dad's control.
Mhm.
But as a child, you have a tendency when something happens that feels off and feels wrong. You tend to turn it internal and think to yourself, what did I do that caused this? And that might sound a little unusual, especially with my story, because why would a 8-year-old kid or 7-year-old kid blame himself for that situation?
Mhm.
Well, kids do that because by asking themselves, what did I do that caused this? It makes them feel like they've got some control, that they can say to themselves, well, okay, if I did something that caused this, maybe I can do something to prevent it from happening in the future. And it's
Mhm.
very comforting to be able to tell yourself that as a child in
Right.
particular. Um, and, that particular circumstance, while I don't think I really consciously absorbed it, this way, but I think it contributed to, beliefs like I don't matter, or I'm not good enough, or, I don't, things that I want don't happen. Um, if you'd asked me, 5 years ago, did I have any childhood traumas? I would have said
Mhm.
no, absolutely not. Because to
Had a great
me,
life, right?
yeah, trauma is like, physical abuse, or,
Mhm.
your parents were fighting all the time, or your dad got arrested, or something like, it had to be at that level for me to think of it as trauma.
Mhm.
And while I didn't have anything like that in my childhood, I had a decent number of, what I considered minor events that all
Right.
contributed very subtly to the same beliefs. I'm not good enough. I don't matter. People
Mhm.
leave. Things like that. And those beliefs are formed from emotions, not logic, like I said before. And
Mhm.
and emotional beliefs over time, they begin to kind of fade into the background. And when I say fade, I don't mean they fade out. I mean they fade from your recognition. You're not aware of them as much anymore. They become filters in how you perceive the world around you. And the neuroscience behind how your brain, if you think about it, at any given moment, there's a tremendous amount of sensory input flooding your brain,
Oh yeah.
from your eyes, your ears, your sense of smell, all five senses. You
Mhm.
can't process it all. And so there's a portion of your brain that acts as a filter that decides what to bring to your conscious attention. And it
Right.
uses your beliefs to do that, even if those beliefs are not positive. And so what ends up happening is the things that agree with your beliefs, things like I don't matter, I'm not good enough, people always leave,
Mhm.
those things get highlighted to your attention, and the beliefs get reinforced. And so how could you possibly, even when you do the work, You mentioned that people that have done the work, they've read the books, they've gone to seminars, they've listened to podcasts, and yet the same patterns keep repeating, and they don't understand why. Well,
Right.
it's because those filters are still in effect, and even the results of the work you're doing are being perceived through those same filters.
So that kind of brings to mind something then when you're talking about being ingrained in you growing up and you fall back on those instincts and those things, and how there's so many things that come at you sensory wise. Now, when you talk about veterans coming out with trauma and TBIs and depression, anxiety, and all that, a lot of times when all that stuff, now you're severely limited in how you take all that in. And so I'm thinking now maybe that's what you're reverting to, is that childhood trauma that you're talking about, because that's what that's what you grew up, that's what's familiar. And so maybe you're falling back on that, which isn't necessarily good, because if you haven't dealt with that past trauma, it's a bad thing for you to latch on, and it's going to keep you with those dark thoughts going forward, right?
When you
I'm not good enough for my wife now. Yeah.
Yes. When you combine those kinds of beliefs, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, with the kind of experiences that veterans have been through, they start to feel like they were contributing to it. Whether, regardless of how true that might be. I know, unfortunately, sometimes there is a little bit of truth to that. But we tend to, the way that you perceive those kinds of events, when you've got those sorts of filters in the back of your mind, I can only imagine, the sorts of impacts that could end up having on people.
Right. Yeah. Because again, when you start having those things, growing up, it's not that big of a thing, but now that you have all this trauma and you see what do veterans do? You're watching what other veterans do. They turn to the alcohol, they turn to the drugs and the addictions of whatever it may be. And then that multiplies those thoughts 10, 20 times. And that's what leads them down that darker spiral. So, really that's what I do with like a lot of my mental health coaching with veterans is, maybe not as deep as what you talk about with the childhood trauma, but we need to go back and figure out what your original trauma was and work on that, because if that's what you're falling back on, dealing with this other stuff, that's not going to help. So yes, you have PTSD from this event, but you've got to fix a little bit of that other stuff before you can go fix that, because it all goes together. Because if you don't fix the childhood trauma, you might fix the PTSD, but then you think about that childhood trauma one day, and then you're right back in that cycle.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the alcohol and the addictions, those are just ways of numbing out. That's all it's doing. It's because I don't want to feel things as strongly as I'm feeling them. And so I'm going to, turn to alcohol or other kinds of addiction. Unfortunately, another thing that's missing for people a lot is connection. Connection is the one thing that I believe can work against addictions, of all kinds. Because addictions typically are about trying to substitute, trying to find something to substitute for what you don't want to feel, and also to substitute for a lack of connection.
Right. And so, when we start talking about following those same patterns, why do people who feel that stuckness, or that I've done the work and I'm kind of stuck there, why do they seem to keep falling back in those same patterns?
It's because there's, like I said earlier, the work that they're doing, the results are still being seen through the same filters. And so if that filter is saying, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, then the actual real positive results of the work you're doing don't agree with the beliefs. And so they're not highlighted to your conscious attention. Whereas even the tiniest little thing that does agree with those beliefs is brought forward to your attention. And so You can work as hard as you want, but if until you can actually become aware of those filters and do the work to shrink them and weaken them, the work's not going to make a difference.
So how do we break that then? How do when we start feeling stuck, or we start realizing that's what we're doing is going back to those beliefs and those patterns? How do we realize that that's not the way to go? What do we need to do to break that, to move forward from there, to learn?
So the work that I did is based around something called memory reconsolidation. And it's through a process, a meditative process, where you go back and you revisit the influences and the events that led to the creation of those beliefs in the first place. And because you're now an adult and you're able to perceive these events and those influences from an adult perspective, including being able to logically think about them and analyze them, you start to develop a better understanding that it's not what you thought it was as a kid. And so what ends up happening with memory consolidation is when the conflicting belief starts to form, and it conflicts with that earlier belief, the earlier belief breaks down, and the actual neural pathways associated with that earlier belief become weakened, and you start to form new neural pathways. And that's how you weaken those filters. Now, I want to emphasize, this is not, something you spend, a weekend or a few weeks of effort on. I did this work over the period of about, I'd say, 4 to 6 months. And there's an entire process to it of going through and identifying all the different events that happened and all the different people that were involved in those events and the beliefs that you formed from those and the emotions that were affected by them, and doing this meditative work on all of that, and also taking into account that it's not as if, you can, the process is called doing a clearing. You can't just do a whole series of clearings in one day and think, wow, I finished half of my influences. You need to allow some time for the neural pathways to strengthen and to the other ones to be weakened. And so, basically it's every other day or so that you can do one clearing. So it takes time.
Well, just like anything else worth doing, it takes time and work and effort. It's not an overnight success, right? Those don't come along. So
you didn't build all that in 4 to 6 months, so
right.
It takes longer than that to
exactly
fix it.
Exactly. This is, a lot of veterans, it's 30, 40 years old by the time you come out of service, and you're just now starting to work on yourself, if that's what the way you're going. So how does this compare to like your traditional therapy or sessions like that? I'm sure it's quite different, like you just mentioned. It's a lot goes into it.
I've done therapy. Like I said earlier, I did all the work. I still feel that I found substantial value in therapy. I think it's crucially important that you find the right therapist. If you are not absolutely 100% comfortable with your therapist, please find another one. Please. It is so crucially important to feel absolutely comfortable telling your therapist literally anything.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, then you're not going to benefit.
I'm right there with you, because going through the VA, I've seen 2 different therapists, and I worked with one, and I give them a few weeks, right? Because one meeting is just your meet and greet, and then you work into it.
Yeah.
But the VA therapists are just, to me, it's almost like they're dealing with the same veteran. This guy's the same one as the last one, same as the last one. I'm going to spit the same stuff out, and they don't tailor to the individuals. But when I went so they finally started outsourcing the CMP exams for your disability ratings, and I went to a non-VA their psychologist, sorry, for the mental health portion of the CMP, and she was the first one I think that really got it because she's a veteran's wife, and she knows that each veteran's different, and you got to tailor it
Yeah.
to them. And when she told me that, she told me and my wife in that meeting that I'm not here to help the VA. I'm not here to screw you out of money. I'm here to help you emotionally and physically and whatever I can do. And so that's where, I'm with you. And for the veterans listening or anybody listening, don't think you got to stay with that first therapist at all. Change them if you got to. Find one that you're completely comfortable with. Give them a couple of chances, but it's going to take time to build that relationship and that trust. And so, again, that's something that's not going to happen overnight. But so this is part. I'm assuming this is part of your Forging Truth website company that you're doing. Is that correct?
Yes, it's still pretty new. I just formed the business last year in May, I think it was, and I'm still in the process of developing content. I do have a free class. I've got an ebook that I'm going to be selling pretty soon. I also have a live paid class that I'm going to be doing, and I've got other offerings that I'm planning in terms of one-on-one coaching, as well as basically, mentoring someone through the same process that I went through to resolve those filters.
And is this an in-person or virtual, or how does that work? Anybody can join in?
It's almost all virtual.
Okay.
I'm not averse to doing in person if that works out. If somebody happens to be nearby, I would not have an issue at all meeting somebody in person. I'm just trying to be as flexible as possible and open to helping as many people as possible. So I'm focused primarily on virtual.
Yeah, I know being virtual these days is a lot easier for a lot of people because the added stress of going in and talking to someone face to face when I can sit in the comfort of my own home and work on something that's already going to be tiring and exhausting, I'm sure. And so, so I've got the website here for those watching, forgingtruth.com. Be sure to check that out. And there you said, I read through this a lot, but you do have some contact information for the classes, but you also, I'm seeing the Phoenix Quest on here. And I know that's a big portion of the Forging Truth. And so what is the Phoenix Quest? Let's talk about that a little bit.
So as I was developing the ideas around the business, I found myself being drawn to the metaphor of the Phoenix. The idea of being, burned up and rising from the ashes. There's a common phrase that I use in a fair amount of my content of, allowing all of the parts of you that were never you to begin with to be burned away so that the real you can rise. So the Phoenix Quest is my name for the entire framework of my offerings. So everything, the classes, the books, the courses, everything.
Awesome. And so you offer a free clarity call on there. I'm guessing that's more like your meet and greet and what the game plan would be and things like that. Okay. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of good information on there. Let me put this into our comments for everybody. And so how did you come about wanting to build this and help more people? What was your thought behind creating this?
So as I did the work and started to realize that there's got to be hundreds, that was where I started. And then I realized, okay, it's not just hundreds, it's thousands. No, it's not just thousands, it's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of men, people who were in the exact same place that I was 3 years ago. They're feeling stuck. The patterns are repeating. They don't know why. And I realized how, everything changed for me, how I basically, what I refer to as becoming unblocked. I'm 58 years old. It took me that long to work through all of this and realize what was going on and to finally feel unblocked. And so I felt that, I want to help other people come to the same realizations and to understand what's really been holding them back.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand it because, when you talk about going through the childhood trauma, and now that I'm thinking about it, it's like there's a lot of trauma in childhood when you think about it,
Yeah.
and now that you don't realize it. And you're talking, parents separating, car accidents being one of those, or sports, or and how a lot of things that people are just now, I guess, identifying as trauma, where it was back then that's just how we lived our lives, right? It's what
Or they're like I was and didn't really think they had trauma.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I thought I had a great childhood growing up. I mean, yeah, my parents separated, but it's not like one of those separations where you never get to see the other parent. They were always cordial. But yeah, it definitely, it shaped my mind on how I saw marriage as an adult and things like that. So I see exactly what you're saying is when you carry those beliefs forward. So great. So far, great. Talking about the childhood and coming up. And so we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the tools like we kind of touched on, how to break through some of this and how we can start repairing ourselves and breaking that stigma of it's okay to ask for help. Because that's part of the problem is that stigma of we're guys. That's not what we do.
Yeah.
So we'll be right back after these messages.
Been home about 6 months now, and I still have my doubts. Well, I'm not sure how I got here or how I'm gonna get out. Well, my mama says I look the same as I did before I left. But if she could see inside of me, it would scare her to death. I can still taste the powder from the barrel of my gun, and I can hear my sergeant screaming, "Run, soldier, run!" And I can feel the backpack on my shoulders, God, it weighed a ton. And I see death in every single thought. Well, they taught me how to put that uniform on. I just can't get it off. Last Saturday they honored us in a small parade downtown. And when they shot off those fireworks, I nearly hit the ground. And while they smiled and cheered for us, all I could do was stare. 'Cause part of me is here at home, but part of me's back there. Well, I can still taste the powder from the barrel of my gun, and I can hear my sergeant screaming, "Run, soldier, run!" And I can feel the backpack on my shoulders, God, it weighed a ton. And I see death in every single thought. They taught me how to put that uniform on. I just can't get it on. Yeah, there's no end in sight. 'Cause even though I'm home now, I'm still fighting for my life. Well, I can still taste the powder from the barrel of my gun, and I can hear my sergeant screaming, "Run, soldier, run!" And I can feel the backpack on my shoulders, God, it weighed a ton. fall. Well, they taught me how to put that uniform on. I just can't get it off. Well, the devil's won some battles, and he may win some more, but don't he know the American soldier will always win the war?
All right, welcome back to Full Speed Ahead After Battle with my guest Doug Belkofer. We're talking about childhood trauma and how it stays with us into becoming adults, and especially with service members. So, going into the service, we have that childhood trauma. Then we have that trauma from just being in the service, being in war, and it starts compiling on top of each other, right? And so how does all of that compiled start affecting people, men mentally? I know we kind of briefly touched on it before, but let's talk about the mental aspect of trauma, stacked on trauma, stacked on trauma. What does that lead to?
Sure. In particular, I think we have to give some thought to a lot of people that join the military are still pretty young, 18, 19, 20. And as I mentioned earlier, while your logical abilities are beginning to develop more and are starting to come online more around those ages, they're still not complete. And so your ability to process situations logically is limited in those ages. It's, some people will say that, it can be in your mid to even later 20s before your logical brain is fully developed. And to think about the impact of traumas on top of traumas on top of traumas, and the beliefs that you're forming along the way. Even if you do have some logical ability to process circumstances, think about the impacts of trauma and how it can still reinforce those same beliefs. Things that happen to you, events, in war, of, I don't matter, or I'm not good enough. How often, people who lose friends, right in front of them and end up taking ownership for that. I can certainly believe that those early beliefs may be contributing to people taking ownership and things like that.
Right. So let's talk about the emotional armor part of that and how that protected us in childhood and growing up. And how does that become the very thing that starts destroying yourself or your relationships, from that emotional armor perspective?
So in many ways, the emotional armor that we wear not only protects us and makes it so that we don't have to reveal our emotions, but it also blocks emotions from coming in. And so while you're protected from being hurt emotionally, you're also shielded from positive emotions. You're unable to feel them. And the cost there, I don't even think you can measure it or quantify it.
Right.
I can speak from my own experience. That's exactly what I did. I was practically in my 40s and I was still, had walls up all around me. Doing all of this work, I eventually also came to a realization that the same beliefs that had, become my filters also led me to subconsciously withdraw from relationships. Every single relationship I was ever in, multiple marriages, over time I would withdraw and become more distant. I can look back on that now and see it as a way of protecting myself, because I believed subconsciously that those relationships were going to end anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might as well start withdrawing emotionally so it doesn't hurt as much when it does end.
Right. Right.
In a lot of ways, I was resentful when I realized all of that.
Yeah. And, in the military, we're taught to compartmentalize. It's a different word for emotional trauma, right? It's just a different word for it. And that's where, a lot of the veterans, they start breaking down and they start disconnecting from family and friends. And that's where they start in with the alcohol and the drugs and whatever else. And that's a lot of times that's the first sign that starts leading to those suicidal thoughts, right? And those tendencies. And that's where we got to start reaching out and asking for that help before that gets too late, whether you're the veteran or it's somebody else. But yeah, that's, it's another thing that's just instilled to us. And we just think it's a part of the job to tough it out. And now that you say it, I'm on my third marriage. This one's going great.
Me too.
Because like you said, looking back on the other two, I learned those mistakes of shutting down and not talking and being there. And I've done that more with this wife than I ever have. And she understands. And now she sees those signs of, I'm having a bad day and slipping away and reverting back to that, emotional armor. And she's like, she knows whether it's, hey, are you okay? Do you need somebody to talk to? Or it's, she can tell if it's, not suck it up, but you've been here before. You're going to be fine because you know how to deal with this. And she just, it's almost like that slap in the face that some of us need to realize we've been here, we've done it, we can keep going forward with it. But going back to the emotional trauma, that's what a lot of veterans, or emotional armor, that's what a lot of veterans face coming out. So if there's a person, one viewer listening today, what do they need to do to take that look inside of them and realize this is what I'm doing? I'm stuck. I'm numb. I'm distancing myself. I know I need help, but I don't know where to start. Where do they need to go? What do they need to do today to start working on that breakthrough?
So I think the most important thing is to realize that all of this can be happening completely without your knowledge. You can be completely unaware that all of this is happening, and that your perceptions are being filtered by beliefs that were formed in your childhood. Those beliefs, they served a purpose when you were a child. They helped protect you.
Right.
They helped make you feel safe. It's just that you don't need that same protection now as an adult. But those beliefs were formed that long ago, and they're still doing the same job they were doing back then.
Right. And, everything changes, right? What is the saying? Nothing ever stays the same, something like that. Everything changes. Our beliefs change as we grow, especially in the service. A lot of people coming out of childhood, maybe they're sheltered and they don't get out of their community and they don't know anything. But when you go into the service and you start working with, people of all race, religions, creeds, colors, and everything else, those new beliefs start forming. And some people latch onto those. And it's, and some of that, we need to do that active work in changing those beliefs. It's not just going to come to us easily. We got to do the work to change those beliefs. And so, like you said, that's what we need to work on, to identify those childhood ones, those ones that are stuck there that we're reverting to, that we no longer need, though. So when veterans, they often mistake emotional shutdown for strength. They think they're saving people, right?
Sure.
I don't want my wife to know what I did because she may look at me differently, right? I don't want my kids to know because, they don't need to know. How do you personally, through the Phoenix, how do you help them realize and see the difference between the strength and that emotional shutdown?
that's not simple.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
There's a lot behind that,
Mhm.
and I can understand. I don't think that I can truly relate to the same level as many veterans can, um, but I also totally understand the idea of, I don't want to share that with my wife or with my kids. They're going to think different about me, and they're not going to be willing to stay, or that it'll totally change what they think of me. I almost feel like there can be a strength to it if you are willing to share. I'm not suggesting that's the answer. When you were saying earlier about how things are different with your current wife, and one of the thoughts that crossed my mind was to be able to remind someone it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to feel things. Let yourself feel them. It's allowed. Your feelings are valid. What you do with that is a different thing. But I would say that if you are able to share your feelings, at least to some degree, you're just going to help them understand you better and help them realize that that's why you can withdraw sometimes.
And just out of curiosity, do you think it's possible that those men can share the feelings without going into depth of some of those stories? Like, I'm feeling anger because of an experience, but I can't go into depth in that experience because I don't want you to see that. And how would a conversation like that go? I know, because I'm like you just said, I've become more open with sharing my feelings with my wife. There's some things I don't want to share with her because I just don't want her to have those thoughts, right? So how can we
Well,
share
you don't
feelings
want
without the
them.
experiences?
Yeah, you don't want them to have to endure what you had to
Mhm.
endure.
Right.
I think that I don't think you necessarily have to go into all the specifics.
Yeah.
I think it's fine to say, sometimes I feel like I failed, because of things that happened, during
Yeah.
my experience as a veteran or in the military. Um, and I lost people, or I saw people, get killed.
Mhm.
I of my two older brothers, the younger of the two was killed in Afghanistan in 2010.
Wow.
Um, you mentioned earlier about two different kinds of people who know when they're
Mhm.
young that they're going to join the military, and
Mhm.
people who don't feel that when they're young. I would say that myself and my two brothers fall into that latter category. My parents had no military background whatsoever. And in fact, if I even go back, to their parents and their siblings and so on, there's hardly any military background whatsoever. And yet all three of us decided to join the military. My oldest brother was in the Navy on nuclear submarines. My other brother, Tom, was in the Army. Um, he was a lieutenant colonel when he was killed. Um, there's things that I don't think it's important to know the details, but I think you can still share how it made you feel. And to
Yeah.
say I still struggle with this today, because sometimes those thoughts pop back into my head.
Yeah. And so, how can a spouse support their person who's carrying both that trauma from childhood and from service without losing who they are as a person? Because we talk about networks and people being there to support and sharing the feelings. So, how can they support the person that's dealing with the trauma without feel like I'm going out of my way and I'm getting tired of this, because it happens, right? They get tired of dealing with
Yeah.
it sometimes.
Well, I think it's difficult, especially if the person that's having the feelings um, is just staying caught up in the feelings, and they're not
Mhm.
really doing anything about it. That's when I think it can be extremely exhausting for the people around them, because what they end up seeing in those cases is somebody who is leaning on people all the time for help and support, but yet isn't, aware of what they might be able to do to, help address those feelings and to address the beliefs behind them.
Yeah. So we got a few minutes. We got a little bit left. But before we get to the end question, how would you summarize your message from tonight in one or two sentences for someone that's just barely holding on? Whether it's the childhood trauma, the service trauma. What's that message to those that see this, that maybe that's their last kick in the seat to be able to find that help?
I think, I touched on this earlier, and I think it's definitely worth emphasizing further, is you're not broken. You didn't make bad choices that caused you to perceive the world around you the way you do. You weren't even necessarily aware of it. And so, I think far too many people, once even the inkling of a thought pops in their head of, is there something wrong with me? They can start down a downward spiral and feel like, I can't get out of this. But, I can't emphasize enough that how much all of this can be going on in your mind without you being aware of it at all.
Yeah. So that leads us into my final question, the 2-minute drill. I run through all my guests, and you already wrapped it up pretty nicely. But I just want to ask if you can say anything at this moment to veterans, to anybody listening, to whoever's stuck with that emotional trauma, childhood trauma, or whatever it is. One thing you want to get off your chest or off your mind. What is that saying? You got 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, if I could leave anything with the viewers and listeners, it's this. Most of us were trained to push through, to adapt, to carry the load. It saved our lives at one point. It taught us a lot about, it taught a lot of us to ignore what we were feeling until we couldn't feel much of anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
If you're watching this and something in you feels tired and numb or disconnected, or like you're always on guard, even at home, I want you to hear this clearly. This doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you failed. And it doesn't mean you're broken. I can't say that enough times. It means something learned how to protect you a long time ago, and it never got told the mission is over. You don't have to fix yourself. You don't have to relive everything. And you don't have to do it alone. Just don't lie to yourself anymore. Pay attention to what keeps repeating. Pay attention to where you shut down. Pay attention to what you avoid feeling. That's not failure. That's information. And when you're ready to look at it honestly, that's where the real strength comes back online. Nothing else needs to happen. Just don't dismiss what you felt listening to this. That part of you is still alive for a reason. That might not have been 2 minutes, but
no, you're good, Doug. That is a great message. I think that goes along the lines of the way I close out every show. Is you served alongside men and women, just like in battle. You're not in this life alone. So reach out, ask for the help, reach for those that are still around you. They're still there. The mission's just different now, and so you got different battle buddies. So keep it up. Doug, thank you so much for coming on Full Speed Ahead tonight. Great information. Definitely opened up my mind to some childhood trauma that I might want to rethink on some of those beliefs and see if that's still carrying forward into my life now. But I think that's definitely a great message. So thank you so much, and good luck with everything with Forging Truth. I hope you're able to help out so many people, because I know as we stay in today's day and age of finding out what things are now, putting labels on things like childhood trauma and stuff like that. More and more people are needing the help. So keep up the great work, and I hope you're able to help so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so thankful to be here.
Yes, sir. All right. Have a great night, Doug. Thank you.
All right.
All right. As we wrap up tonight's episode of Full Speed Ahead After Battle, I want to take a moment to reflect on the conversation we just had with Doug. He brought the kind of truth that doesn't just land in your ears, it hits you right in the chest. We talked about the beliefs we inherit without ever choosing them, the emotional armor we wear without realizing the cost, and the patterns that we repeat even when we think we've done the work. Doug reminded us that numbness isn't weakness, it's a survival strategy, and breaking that cycle takes courage, honesty, and a willingness to finally look inward. If something Doug said tonight stirred something in you, good. That means you're alive, and that means that you're still finding a spark worth fighting for. And speaking of fighting, next week, we keep this momentum going. Our guest will be Sean Lowry, the veteran guy, Afghanistan veteran, survivor of addiction, survivor of suicidal thoughts, and a man who has walked through the darkest parts of the valley and lived to tell the story. Sean is coming on this show to remind every single one of us listening that you are not battling this alone, like we just said. Lean on your people when the weight gets heavy, and reach out when the thoughts get loud. And watch how the real, true friends rise to the occasion, because that's what this community does. And we rise together. We show up together, and we carry each other when the road gets rough. So until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out, and your story isn't over. This is Full Speed Ahead After Battle. We'll see you next week. Dismissed.
Life is like a duck. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Here at Military Broadcast Radio, we're teaming up with our friends at Die Tired, the veteran-friendly music band spreading strength, resilience, and mental health awareness one shirt at a time.
And check this out. Their brand new shirts feature broadcast beaker right on the breast pocket. A reminder that you can weather the storm, and you're never alone.
Shirts are only $25, and proceeds support giving veterans a voice. MBR's mission to teach veterans how to podcast and videocast. Because when our vets are talking, they're not overthinking. They're not second-guessing. Together, we stop the 22 stigma. Grab your shirt today at mbradio.us and hit the shop. Or go directly to toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband. That's toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband.
Suit up, stand strong.
Remember, we're unduckable together.
You're built tougher than the storm.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.